Senator Young, Republican from Indiana, thank you so much for coming on ChinaTalk.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the Office of Global Competition Analysis and a broader theme in your speaking and legislation about the need to invest time and money in really defining the problem. I'd love to hear you reflect on how policymakers got up to speed on semiconductors and how they're coming up the curve on AI. You know, what information inputs do legislators receive today around emerging technology? And what structural changes do you think the country needs to invest in order to improve that information flow?
So the way I gathered information on, let's call it our semiconductor technology, or semiconductor tech and production gap with other countries, our vulnerabilities was, I talked to certain members of the national security community who happened to be at some social gatherings I was attending. I heard it referenced our precarious situation as it relates to semiconductors in a classified setting when we were having a briefing from some military officials and administration leaders. But there was no, back to your, larger point, there was no systematic way for me to assess the precarity of our technological advancement and our military capacity to produce semiconductors. And certainly no way for me to compare in a rigorous way our ability to produce these semiconductors, how important they were, and how other countries were doing. There was no Office of Net Assessment for your DoD nerds out there for us to assess our strength versus the strength of certain adversaries. And that's what we need. That's what we need. That's what this legislation that Senator Bennett and I have co-authored would provide.
So, this is an executive branch idea. We also have had Chevron, and Justice Kagan in her dissent pointed specifically to AI as the sort of thing that would be really difficult in a post-Chevron world. What type of, why are legislators reluctant to give their staffers raises and hire more of them and bring back the OTA? What sort of gives on Congress members investing in their own institutions' capacity as well?
Well, number one, I think members of Congress believe that those expenditures are unnecessary. I don't. I actually think an OTA, at least in retrospect, and there will be things that we champion and advance in this generation that in retrospect will be regarded as misguided. I think it was misguided to eliminate the OTA as a modest expenditure. It helped members of Congress make smart decisions about technology. There are ways that in my own office, we've been able to augment our team. We brought on some scientists and technical experts to interface with the experts. But I think every member of Congress needs that kind of expertise at the ready. Let me kind of step back from your question, which you're getting at here, which is with the Chevron doctrine, Sotomayor's, I think, lamentation that the government will be unable to adjust policymaking nimbly enough as we learn more things about emerging technologies like AI. The advancements will happen too quickly. Policymaking will be unresponsive. I think that's a fair concern, frankly. I supported overturning the Chevron doctrine because I think government has grown too distended, too out of touch from the concerns and sometimes the values to the people I represent. But there is a risk here. I mean, Congress now needs to fill in the gaps, to legislate, and to be watching for major changes in society that require adjustment, sometimes adjustment fairly quickly. So how will we do this? I've thought about it. We need to embed within government, within our federal government, a lot more expertise than we currently have as it relates to AI innovations, AI capability. And these individuals need to be in touch with members of Congress when there are gaps in our laws. And members of Congress, in turn, need to do their oversight duties better than they have in the last number of decades. Right now, we're not particularly incentivized to, I'm on the Commerce Committee. I'm not as incentivized to get to know people within the executive branch at the Department of Commerce who have expertise in these different verticals. But we're going to have to do that more, hold more oversight hearings, and work with the government agencies and those experts who work within them to figure out where the policymaking gaps are and where new lawmaking will be required. But no doubt about it, this is going to require members of Congress not just to lament the state of things and appear on television and so forth, but actually to legislate when required. And it's our time to put up or shut up.
So we only let the adults in the room on ChinaTalk, and you're one of them. But a lot of your colleagues aren't. Do you have like any structural solutions for changing the incentives to get folks actually focused and excited about legislating again?
Yeah, I do. I mean, number one, if you can increase the quality of your technical experts in every agency of government, you do that by changing how much you can compensate people in government, in part, right? So we propose more flexibility in government hiring so you can get those AI experts on board. And then that also will help with retention. Some agencies have long done this very well. FDA, for example, the Food and Drug Administration is broadly respected. I mean, there are some challenges that our pharma and bio companies have with and food companies with the FDA, but generally it's a pretty well respected agency. Treasury also is able to attract and retain quite a bit of talent. So we need to do that with other agencies. But I'd say with respect to my colleagues, that's really where the incentives come in. The number one incentive is just now you actually have an ability to shape these things and not have your handiwork overridden by the agencies. Number two, since Chevron has been overturned, it's pretty clear that you can't pass vague law and leave it to the administrations to figure out the rest. You're actually going to be incentivized through the law to fill in the messy details of legislation. That requires a lot of work. I know because my legislative efforts actually do fill in the detail. And to try and get 60 votes in the United States Senate, which by definition is a bipartisan effort, is oftentimes very challenging and unglamorous. But we will be held accountable for failing to do so. So those incentives will kick in and we'll respond to them as human beings do.
So, you pointed to this idea of civil service reform, which I am sort of worried is going to very quickly become a partisan thing in a Trump administration, given how they're currently talking about their version of civil service reform. Any sort of thoughts or ideas on how to, in 2025, pick this up in a bipartisan way?
This is a tough one. This is admittedly a very tough one. I mean, on one hand, you're right in that civil service reform, almost in any form it takes, I think most people would agree, it would become a partisan exercise. But to do nothing is also partisan in a sense, right?
Mm.
I mean, the Democratic Party tilt to our civil service, or at least the Democratic Party tilt to large unions, including government unions, is pretty apparent to me. So I think what we need to do is step back and say, all right, what does good policy making dictate? Should we make some changes to how our civil service operates? And I think it's entirely fair for us to open up this Pandora's box and try to engage in some necessary and responsible policy changes. I'm not on this particular committee. That may be a blessing because this would be quite the fight. But I think generally the decision to take a look at how we hire, how we fire, how we hold accountable government employees and what sort of responsibilities they should have and how they should exercise them is like an essential function of our board of directors or members of Congress.
Yeah. And what's striking is when, you pointed to two places that have a reputation for really good talent. The CHIPS Act Program Office is another. And part of the way they were able to do that is to basically have it written into your legislation that they didn't have to follow the rules. And if you get the best results.
All right. Just to not to quibble. All right. But the characterization, they had to follow a different set of rules. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay. But anyways, point taken.
But you are right. You are right. And so that's an argument because if you look at the performance of the CHIPS program office, I mean, it's starting to receive rave reviews, even from those who are highly skeptical of the broader CHIPS and science effort. But the performance suggests that, maybe we should extend this kind of different framework to other areas of government. And I think that's an appropriate conclusion.
All right. Well, let's stay on the CHIPS Act. So aside from ducking my interview requests, CPO gets full marks, I think, from me and everyone else who isn't like over-indexing on childcare requirements. So the science part of the CHIPS and the Science Act, you've spoken in the past about the idea of R&D funding as a national comparativeness imperative. And, that has been resonating, but not enough to get the funding that I think a lot of folks were hoping for. Thoughts on the future of those appropriations and what's maybe changed over the past year or two to lead to the numbers that you've seen come out for the NSF and other organizations?
Yeah, I will directly answer that. But first, let me lay a predicate because this is, the prioritization of funding for the science portion has mostly fallen on partisan political lines, with Democrats being supportive of more R&D funding and science portion of the CHIPS and Science Act funding, and Republicans more skeptical. I've been one of a handful of Republicans who been vocally supportive, of course, being co-author of the broader effort. But this should not be a partisan effort. Number one, it kind of the whole Endless Frontier Act, which is the science portion of CHIPS and Science. I authored the Endless Frontier Act years before the CHIPS and Science Act passed with Chuck Schumer, and that effort began during the Trump years, and we were working with some high-placed individuals in the State Department, in the Trump State Department. So that's point number one. Point number two is just sort of our own history. What we saw beginning in the Eisenhower years was a massive increase in federal research investment through our research universities, through our DOE labs. We were able to win a space race in the subsequent decades. And we saw amazing growth in the aerospace and many other sectors on account of those that seed corn investment through our national research enterprise. But the trend lines began to change. In the 90s and the 2000s, we saw, though the benefit to cost ratio of research investments is sort of off the charts, we've seen the number, or the percentage rather, of research applications that were actually could be approved, that were otherwise reviewed very favorably by the National Science Foundation and others. We saw the percentage of those applications go down because the resources they had to fund them were drying up. Those are lost economic opportunities for our entire economy. As our fiscal situation has deteriorated, there's naturally been a desire to pull back from a number of investments. I would remind a number of my fellow green eye shade legislators out there that the real number we should be looking at as we think about our fiscal deterioration is debt to GDP. It's a fraction, debt to GDP. So you can't starve your economy of one of the components of your GDP, which is R&D investment, in order to deal with the debt. Let's grow the denominator while we try and control the numerator as well. And so that's how I look at it. Going forward, will things change? I think there's a real opportunity to remind a Trump administration that they can take credit for this reinvigoration of the research enterprise. The genesis of this idea was in part a function of my interaction with the Trump administration. And let's make America grow again, right?
Yeah, I remember those heady days of $100 billion endless frontier. But look, we're further on than we're in a relatively better world state than you could have asked for in 20.
Remember all the iterate. I mean, we had the Endless Frontier Act, and then you had U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, USICA, and then we had CHIPS, and then we had CHIPS Plus, and then we had CHIPS and Science. So we went through a lot of iteration. The marketing department went in over.
Speaking of spending lots of money, the AI policy roadmap, you guys came up also with sort of tens of billions of dollars of money you were hoping to use the federal government, spend federal government money on to further AI. First, well, let's start with where you think the government from a spending perspective should be playing in this space in particular.
I don't think the government's going to have to spend a lot of money except for on some fundamental research, right? I mean, this is one of the categories of government spending that the likes of Milton Friedman and so many others embraced. Spending money on a public good is something that's been broadly supported in my own party. And of course, we found bipartisan support for it through this roadmap, AI roadmap developed myself, Chuck Schumer, Mike Rounds, Martin Heinrich. So is that a lot of money? Yes, it's a lot of money. And we need to get more clarity for members on exactly, what this money would be spent on. But where did this dollar figure, about, tens of billions of dollars in government research on AI come from? It came from the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. This was a group of experts. Co-chairs were Eric Schmidt, formerly of Google, Robert Work, longtime Pentagon luminary and leader, and they recommended that figure. We embraced it because we had heard from the best minds in the world, from Zuckerman to Gates, to our Pentagon officials and many others, that it made a lot of sense. But beyond that, I don't think much money is going to have to be spent. We're going to have to change how we spend some of our money on education and workforce in this country, and make sure that every American is literate in artificial intelligence, is ready for an AI-enabled world. And then the main challenge of preparing for this AI-enabled world is going to be one of adapting our existing law, whether they're laws through statute or it's court-made law through precedent. Adapting those laws, which hopefully reflect our standards on privacy and consumer protection and so many other, adapting them to an AI-enabled world. And sometimes that will require legislative fixes or adjustments, and that needs to be handled as it's always handled through committees of jurisdiction. And occasionally they can be adjusted even in this post-Chevron environment through regulatory action. But here again, this invites members of Congress to do their job as this technology rapidly changes our society and our lives, mostly in a positive way.
So you've been a strong supporter of NIST and the AI Safety Institute. I'd like to read you a line from the GOP party platform, if I may. We will repeal Joe Biden's dangerous executive order that hinders AI innovation, imposes radical left-wing ideas on the development of this technology. That kind of seems like killing the AI Safety Institute. I don't know. What's your argument to your fellow party members that the work that NIST is doing is valuable and important for the country?
I mean, I know some people are on the platform committee, and there are parts of this GOP platform that I think are really important. Our party came together on some provisions related to life and the marriage, for example. But I also know sometimes these things are developed by, 22-year-old, sort of interns, and they got the AI portfolio because they knew how to operate the latest version of ChatGPT, right? So I am not reading too much into that. It was still, it was vague, it was populistic, and it was not of great concern to me. What I'm more interested in is my interaction with certain former and probably future Trump administration officials who are really excited about the possibilities of artificial intelligence, but recognize that we need some sort of responsible regulatory structure. And some of the things they acknowledge the Biden administration has done through its executive orders on this is quite wise. It needs to be put into law to be given some permanence. Other things is not perfect. It's going to have to be revisited, which is natural in these early stages. And then in Congress, at least so far, the issue of artificial intelligence and lawmaking around it has not grown particularly partisan. In fact, you look at that document, two Republicans, conservative Republicans, two liberal Democrats put that together, and we were able to come together on a whole range of issues. So I think you're going to see mostly continuity and an evolution of policymaking between administrations, but there will probably be naturally some changes as well.
So when Trump proposed no tax on tips, the next day
By the way, let me just go ahead and correct the record, because
Sure.
some of your folks maybe have an opportunity to not listen to the whole thing. If there are any Zuckerman jokes out there, Zuckerberg. All right, I heard myself say that, and I kind of cringed. Go ahead.
So Trump proposed a tax on no tips, and the next day we had bills in the House and the Senate. He also went on a podcast and talked about stapling green cards to PhDs, and I haven't seen a whole lot of bills. I don't know, like what gives here where are we on high skilled immigration?
The more the merrier. That's where I am. If we can train the world's best, some of the world's best talent and help endow them with amazing potential to add value to economies and improve lives, why wouldn't we want to sort of reap fruit of our harvest and say, you can stay here. You can stay here for a few years and employ our people, innovate, spend a bunch of money, and lift our economy. I think we can do two things at once. We can control our border. We can, sort of rationalize our legal immigration system. And we can admit there are certain categories of workers where we need more. And in this area, we need more rich people. We need more smart people. We need more people with amazing ideas and potential to improve our lives, and they're graduates of our university. So I'm all in for that. And of course, we got to secure. Once again, I'll close with. Of course, we have to secure the border. Most everyone now agrees with. I think the Biden administration only started agreeing a couple of months ago when it began to hurt them politically, which is unfortunate.
We've talked a lot about the promote side of the ledger here. From on the protect side of AI and semiconductors, we have compute, we have data, we have algorithms, right? Do you have strong opinions about where and in what way the U.S. should be decoupling from China when it comes to artificial intelligence?
Uh, I think we need to rebalance, and some of our colleges, I think of Purdue University in my home state, have done a very good job of rebalancing who we train to program these artificial intelligence models, and so I think that's one thing we have to do with respect to the algorithm piece. With respect to compute, there again, we need to be thinking about workforce issues, and if we can rebalance from Chinese nationals, just to be direct about it, to India and other large economy countries that want to send more students over here, we should be doing that. Rewarding very good behavior. But we should invite foreign capital, foreign businesses in here. And finding ways, if you think about the third leg of the stool, we have to unlock more data and continue to invest in research to the extent we can produce synthetic data to train these models. That's going to be a force multiplier because, of course, we're unable to lock the sort of data that state capitalist economies that don't share our Enlightenment values can unlock. I think of China and Russia and such countries who can take the health genetic data of their entire population without having any moral qualms or legal obstacles, and that produces a lot of data. So we're really going to have to up our game in terms of making sure that we're able to unlock more data and put it into formats that can be used to train these models. And then it gets more complex. This is where Congress definitely is going to have a role. Make sure that there are secure and clear property rights around data, so developers will know what they can use and what they cannot use to train models.
So, interestingly, in that Trump interview I referenced, the interviewers were sort of tiptoeing around. We need more high schooled immigrants from like India and Europe, blah, blah, blah. And Trump actually went off and said, and China too. But we have this GOP party platform that says Republicans will use existing federal law to keep Christian-hating communist Marxists and socialists out of America. Just to push back a little bit, Senator,
Yeah, please.
I don't want to say Chinese Foreign Exclusion Act, but there is something like tricky and very uncomfortable about you saying like one nationality is preferred over others. When we're talking about people who want to live and settle and bring their lives here, right?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable for me to say it as well, and so there's a thoughtful counter. The fact that it's uncomfortable to you or to me doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. Otherwise, we get into sort of like safe spaces through the radio, and that would be not lead to very good decision making or small L liberal democratic dialogue. So the challenge is that we're dealing with dual use technologies here. The artificial intelligence solutions that are used to help us choose and optimize grocery list are quite similar in how they operate to some of the AI technologies that are helping you make better decisions on a battlefield. So that's the challenge. And are you training people who operate within a system in a way that will allow the People's Liberation Army to improve their capabilities over a period of time? I think that's the sort of like hard-nosed sort of consideration we're supposed to have. Now, there's a competing view here, and it's a bit in tension with what I've just laid out, and I'm still struggling, admittedly, to kind of reconcile it. And that is, well, wait, don't you have an opportunity for a brain drain out of China? You do. But then the counterpoint will be made thoughtfully. Well, isn't there leakage from that brain drain out of China, right, into the United States? Leakage meaning espionage. Yes, you have to concede there's a fair amount of espionage, very difficult to quantify. These are the moral dilemmas that we're put in, not because I just decided to go there, but because this horrific regime in Beijing put us in these moral dilemmas.
Sure.
So if we have a limited number of resources to invest in education, we want to continue to invite foreign nationals for all kinds of reasons, in part because it subsidizes our own students to go to college, but because they add value to the economy, build better relations with the world, and so forth. Also, our value proposition. But should we give two equally sort of merited students, one from India, one from China? Should you get a little favor to a country that is more cooperative with us? And India may not always be the best example, right? I mean, just this week we saw Modi palling around with Putin, but at least they're sort of on side as it relates to the broader competition between us and China. So I guess I wanted to elaborate, because it's very easy for those who I think aren't thinking about the entire picture to just shy away from this conversation because, think of the border security challenge. The Biden administration, for the better part of 3.5 years, refused to secure our southern border because it didn't want to be called racist. That's my reading. And I think that's a good way, a good illustration of what failing to adapt to the times can lead to.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to close, like, there were a whole lot of foreign nationals who were working on the Manhattan Project, and the America, part of the reason the West won World War II was because we got the better Germans, right? So it's not an impossible square to circle, and I agree with you that, like, you can't not talk about issues of espionage. But
how many individuals was that? I mean, that was how many individuals?
Foreign nationals on the Manhattan Project?
No, the Manhattan Project. Yeah. It was enough to monitor, right?
Well, I mean, it was actually like 100,000 people, depending on where you want to draw the circle. But sure, yeah, like 100,000 folks in Los Alamos is different than a broad ecosystem. But I guess, it comes back to the question of, like, do you want to try to run faster, or like, is the dominant strategy running faster or making sure that whatever secrets you have don't leak out? Because I do think there ultimately is some sort of trade-off there, right?
There's absolutely a trade-off. There's absolutely a trade-off that occurs. I think, we would all agree, and this is where so far we've ended up on policy making. There's certain types of research that are so sensitive on account of their national security implication that you have to really be scrutinized and read in before you can participate in that. And through the Chips and Science Act, we were actually able to raise the standard, which I think was broadly agreed to be an appropriate countermeasure to some of the leakage that's occurred. But we've had still far too much, and I think this will be an ongoing debate. And candidly, though I sort of landed on one side of the line, I'm open to counterpoint, counter-argument. But what I won't do is embrace a particular position because it feels uncomfortable. Instead, what I'll do is embrace a position based on what is in the national security interests and broader interests of my constituents.
Senator Young, we end every episode with a song. Do you have one that captures the energy of your technology policymaking, or
captures the energy? Dirty deeds done dirt cheap. AC/DC. There you go.
Thank you so much for being a part of ChinaTalk.
Thanks. Out here.